With us now is the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, South Dakota Republican John Thune. Mr. Leader, welcome back to the show. Congratulations on the new title.
Thanks, Guy. Always good to be with you.
Really tough subject to start here. A horrible incident in the sky right by Reagan Airport last night. The initial reports were disturbing, and of course, it was kind of a worst-case scenario in a lot of ways. Your thoughts on what we've learned?
Well, you're right. I mean, it was a tragic accident, and on a day like today, all you can do is pray for those who are on the plane and their loved ones, as well as the first responders who have worked through the night in frigid waters searching for survivors. And so my wife Kimberly and I are keeping all those in our prayers, and we've been in touch with the relevant agencies. Obviously, we need to figure out how and why it happened, and then make sure it never happens again.
Both of your colleagues from the state of Kansas were there at the airport last night for a press conference. You could see on their faces how upset they were. Wichita is a good-sized city, but still a community where it feels like almost everyone's going to know someone who was on that flight. When they were making assurances at various points of that press conference from different officials that the federal government was going to do everything necessary when it came to not just the recovery mission, but also the investigation, maybe corrections in the future to ensure this type of thing doesn't happen again, is there a role for Congress? What would that role be?
There could be, and we will get a readout, and there will be a full investigation, FAA, NTSB. There already have been some preliminary readouts from that, and whereas, like I said, we're collecting and getting more information about it. But, obviously, if there are things that need to be fixed or changed that Congress is responsible for taking action on, we'll certainly do that. This is something that we just absolutely have to prevent from ever happening again in the future, and but we, until the investigation is complete, won't know fully what the facts were and what the contributing factors were. But as soon as we know that, there will be a plan of action, and whoever needs to be involved with that will be, because it's clearly it's something that we can never have happen again.
Senator, today was another very busy day on your side of Capitol Hill. More confirmation hearings, some fireworks. Again, we saw some of that yesterday as well, with these nominees from President Trump up there getting grilled by members of both parties. Of course, the opposition tends to go a little bit harder, but you never know. There have been tough questions from both sides. What have you thought about these hearings, generally speaking? And when it comes to some of the more controversial nominees, based on the conversations that you've had with members of your caucus, are you confident that the votes are there to confirm all of these nominees, most of the nominees? How do you see it?
Well, and I always reserve judgment, not to, only because I think it's important for them to have their hearings. And as you point out, there were some big ones today. RFK had a second one. He had one yesterday. And you had Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard today. And, what we want to make sure was happening, Guy, was that the committees would be hard at work in moving the nominees through the process. And I've not gotten in the practice of handicapping anyone's chances or getting out ahead of that work. But what I will say about each of the, President Trump's nominees is they're each receiving a fair process in the Senate. And I will say that all of them seem to be doing very well at their hearings. And I think in the personal meetings that have been held as well, that there's been, pretty good readouts from our members. I mean, I think, again, without handicapping it, I think these noms have a path to getting across the finish line, but it is a process, and what I've assured them along the way is that they would have a fair process and an opportunity to make their case and to answer the hard questions which inevitably are going to come.
One of the questions that comes to mind for people who are watching all of this is the time frame of when confirmations will actually occur. We heard from President Trump earlier today. One of the questions during the press conference was about the importance of rapid confirmation processes to get his team in place. He said, of course, yes, that's what I want, as soon as possible. I know today, in light of the events last night, probably not the biggest day for throwing a bunch of partisan punches. That being said, you have warned a few times in speeches on the Senate floor, you've said it elsewhere, if the opposition wants to drag things out. There's a way of doing this that's the hard way versus the easy way. You said we're happy to do this the easy way, but if you want to do it the hard way, then we're going to do it that way. What exactly does that mean? What does that look like procedurally?
Well, that's actually a really good question. And I, like the president, I too want to make sure that we are moving aggressively on getting his noms in place so they can implement his agenda. And we've kind of we look at the benchmark, and I pointed out that President Obama, the standard was he got his first 12 nominees through the Senate in 15 days. It took Trump 43 days in 2017 to get the same 12 through the process. So we want to go back to the Obama standard, and that's what we've been insisting on with the Democrats. And so far, we are on that pace. But they can make it hard. I mean, they can force these nominations to drag out, particularly at the cabinet level. Those are 30 hours on the floor. You got to have 2 votes, a cloture vote to proceed to it, and then ultimately a vote on finally confirming that person. And for whatever reason, I mean, the Democrats have dug in on some of these, and certainly some that are very well qualified. I mean, John Radcliffe last week, they stalled on, they drug it out. He was up for CIA, came out of the committee 14-3, highly qualified, obviously, and with big bipartisan support, and they decided to block it on the floor. So we've been pushing. We drove through the weekend.
14-3, right? Out of committee, 14-3 is overwhelming. That is incongruous, then, with saying we're going to drag the full floor vote as long as possible. That seems odd to me.
Yeah, it is, and especially on that one. So we pushed them through the weekend, and we're going to keep grinding and grinding and grinding. You know, there is a hard way and there's an easy way, and right now, at least as of today, what the readout we're getting from the Democrats is they're trying to block again noms. We had, Doug Burgum, for example, who's on the floor right now, and his vote will happen later today, but then the next one up would be Doug Collins. He came out of the Veterans Affairs Committee 18 to 1, and but so we're gonna test the limits of whether or not they want to try and block him too. If they do, we'll just keep grinding and grinding and grinding and using the clock and forcing them to be here to defend their actions.
Yeah, so is that the hard way? When you say we're going to do it the hard way, it's like, all right, if you want to do this, then we're going to go through nights, we're going to go through weekends. You're not going to be able to go home or back to your home states. We're going to keep doing this because you're insisting that we be here. So fine, you're making the bed, let's lie in it. Is that what you're talking about?
That's right. Yeah, and obviously that worked last weekend. Eventually, they came to their senses and enabled us to get some through the process that we should have been able to get through, particularly those national security ones. And you can see with what happened last night at National Airport just how important it is that you get the leaders in place in these important agencies and departments. And so we want to make sure that we've got a full team on the ground, and that the president has his people in place to respond to whatever things come up, and then to continue to drive his agenda.
All right. Speaking of that agenda, a couple of things on that. This freeze, the freeze that was temporary, and then that got frozen by a judge, and then it seems like the memo ordering the freeze was then rescinded, but they're now saying, well, the idea isn't rescinded, just the memo. Can you decode this for us? Because it's been kind of confusing, frankly.
Yeah, I think that frankly, I think any administration that comes in, and this one's, no exception, there were a lot of things done as Biden was going out the door that, to fund his programs, his priorities. And, administrations have some latitude. Obviously, there's sometimes clear direction from Congress, which ultimately has the power of the purse under the Constitution to direct where funds go. But administrations come in, they move money around. And so what this administration had said, and I think they were perfectly on good grounds to do that, is to say, okay, we're going to look at the president's executive orders and a lot of these various programs out there. We're going to just take a quick pause and take a look and see if, in fact, there are areas we want to move money around, or any areas that implicate any of his executive orders in ways where they would have funding going to things that this president has made it clear he doesn't want to fund. So I think there's some, like I said, authority for that in the president and his team, but I think it's at the same time as they did that, it got a little bit overblown, and the Democrats immediately reacted and started creating these apocalyptic type scenarios that everything's going to get shut down and not funded, which wasn't the case. But I think the administration has since come to the conclusion to provide greater clarity to this, to walk that back a bit and give further direction and more specific direction about where they wanted money spent and not spent. So it's a work in progress. I think this is, like I said, true. I think that pausing and taking a good look at things and examining how money's being spent is something that an administration certainly has. It's their prerogative to do. At the end of the day, they opted to pull that one back and to issue another one that I think gave greater clarity. And so again, it's part of the give and take, and something that a new administration, in my view, has a right to do.
We were just talking about confirmations, nominations. As for legislation, there's been this ongoing conversation now for weeks. One bill versus two bills. And Trump talking about one big, beautiful bill when it comes to the reconciliation process, or maybe he's open to two. We had your colleague from Texas, Ted Cruz, on this show making, I think, a very animated and thoughtful and I think compelling case for two bills and why that is preferable, and he laid that all out. That's kind of where my head is personally, but we've also heard from people familiar with Speaker Johnson's mentality and what he's got to deal with in the House, that maybe trying to get everything into one bill would actually be more beneficial and easier for him given the dynamics over there and the very, very thin majority and what he's got to deal with. How intensive have those conversations been between yourself and Speaker Johnson's team? I know everyone says it doesn't really matter because all that matters is the outcome. Yeah, but the how is quite important, right? If it means sometimes succeeding or failing based on how you try to approach something. Do you have a strong point of view on the one bill versus two bill question, and how would that look?
That's a good question, Guy. And it's the big debate here around Washington. I think you get outside, you get a mile away from Washington D.C. People don't care about how you do it; they care about what you do, and
Sure.
In the end, that's what we're going to be judged by. But I do think it was sort of our belief in the first place that dealing with these issues quickly on the border, on national security, on energy, and putting some points on the board there, and then dealing with the other pieces of a reconciliation process that could happen later on taxes and spending and hopefully some regulatory reform, or all things that we could do in two steps. And I think the argument again for doing that to me is a very sound one. But at the end of the day, and this is a unique opportunity we have, because reconciliation is a process that's only available when you have unified control of the government, when you have the House, the Senate, and the White House. And it's very rare that you have all three. In fact, you go back for 100 years, there have only been 4 times where Republicans have had all three, what we call the trifecta, and in each case it only lasted for 2 years. So it's very possible that this could be you never know what the midterm elections what's going to happen.
Limited time opportunity.
So we want to make the most of it. But the numbers that I always tell people you have to keep in mind are 218 and 51. And what we do in the Senate obviously is shaped by what ultimately can pass in the House. And so we've been trying to work closely, coordinate with Speaker Johnson and his team about what's achievable, what's doable. And they have slightly different views about how to get to the finish line. We all have the same destination in sight, and now it's just a function of how best to get there. But I was the initial advocate for the two-bill strategy, and I still think that makes a lot of sense. But I'm also realistic enough to know that it's going to be whatever can get 218 in the House, and so we're very cognizant of the Speaker and what his views are on this and what they think they can pass there, and then whatever can get 51 in the Senate. At the end of the day, those are the numbers that really matter.
Final question, and it's a procedural one. It's a little in the weeds, I get it, but I think it's important for this audience to hear it from you. You had given some guidance. I think it was exactly the right call to say, look, we are not, as Senate Republicans, going to try to overrule the parliamentarian when it comes to what is germane. So for the reconciliation process to work, for it to be legal, it has to fit within certain restrictions, and you can't go beyond. You can't color outside those lines. And this nonpartisan person, the parliamentarian, decides whether the coloring is inside or outside the lines. And you've heard, and sometimes you'll hear it on the left too, well, why not just have the vote override that person and do whatever you want? You're saying we're not going to do that. I think that is a long-term strategy. It can be short-term frustration, but long-term the right thing to do for the institution. If you could just explain your thinking there briefly.
Sure. Well, and I think I believe that to be the case. The Senate was created uniquely, differently from the House by the founders, to be the place where it requires deliberation and bipartisanship, which is why on most things it takes 60 votes in the Senate, which I think a lot of people, most Americans, I think, well, if you're 51, you can do anything. In the Senate, you can't. It takes 60 with one exception, and that's budget reconciliation, which you have as a tool available to you when you have unified control of the government, House, Senate, and White House. So this is a rare and unique opportunity to accomplish parts of our agenda with 51 votes. But that, too, is tempered by, the restrictions that are applied to that particular procedure. And the parliamentarian in the Senate is essentially the referee, calls the balls and the strikes about what you can and can't do with respect to this process. So as we think through it and work through it, it's always a back and forth and a conversation with the parliamentarian about, and we're going to push the envelope as far as we can, believe me, because we saw the Democrats do that in the last couple of years when they had unified control of the government.
Sure. Yeah, but that's of course different than blowing it up like a mini nuclear option. And if the Republicans were to do that, you guarantee the Democrats would do it next time they had the chance, and who knows what they would implement using that exact tool. So I don't think you want to break the process that way, and that's the argument that you've made. I think it is the right one. I think it's the judicious one here moving forward. Senate Majority Leader John Thune of South Dakota, a Republican, of course, our guest here on the Guy Benson Show. Mr. Leader, again, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to talking again.